Good morning, and if you're just tuning in, you're tuning in to 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubaraka Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubaraka. We are streaming live from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut. We are also live on TuneIn Radio. You can catch us on Facebook, you can catch us on Instagram, and Periscope, and Stream Me, and Twitch, and everywhere where you are, we try to be there, so you have no excuse for missing the great lineup of shows we have here on WNHHLP. It is a beautiful Wednesday morning here in New Haven, Connecticut. It has been gorgeous for like the last 2 days, which is a huge relief because it's been raining like every day. I've lived here for 28 years and I don't remember it raining so much in the springtime. I told my husband the other day, I said, I feel like I live in like Washington State or something. No shade on Washington State. Okay, maybe a little shade on Washington State. I've actually never been there. I just heard that it rains all the time. No shade. So we have a beautiful Wednesday morning. And it is even a more beautiful day for over 1.5 billion people around the world who are fasting today. So today we are going to talk about what is a Ramadan. Every year around this time, Muslims all over the world began to abstain from food and drink during the day, and there are 101 questions that people normally have. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to really enlighten people and also answer some questions. So I am going to be giving like general information about what Ramadan is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about fasting, the benefits of fasting. So this is kind of like my baby. I love talking about intermittent fasting, fasting for spirituality, fasting for clarity. So we are going to have a good conversation today. If you have any questions or comments, you can actually comment below the video. I'm going to try to be online and look at my Instagram and look at my Facebook video to make sure that I get to people's questions, which is going to be awesome. So it's going to be an interactive show for us today. If you are on Facebook, you can find us at the New Haven Independent Facebook Live or any place else that I'm going to be sharing it. All right. So fasting is something that has been done for literally thousands of years. Every major religion has some version of fasting. So people who are Buddhist fast, people who are Christian fast, people who are Jewish fast, and people who are Muslims fast. So Muslims fast at a specific time of the year. So every single Muslim around the world during the same month is fasting. Fasting for Muslims is probably, we're told, is probably the most strenuous or strict fast of all of the religions. We have the longest fast. We have the most restrictions when it comes to fasting. So all of this makes fasting in Ramadan a very unique month. So for the month of Ramadan, which is one of the 12 months on the Islamic calendar. So the Islamic calendar goes by a lunar calendar. So that means that it is based on every new moon, as opposed to the solar calendar, which most of the world in business definitely goes by. The 12 months out of the year, 365 days, it is counting the rotations of the sun as opposed to the rotations of the moon. So it is calculated, right, based on how many times the sun rises. But a lunar calendar is based on the rotation of the moon, the full moon, the crescent moon. If you look outside at any night, you can be, you see that the moon is a different shape just about every night. And that is the calendar that the Islamic calendar goes on. What makes this a little different is it makes each month rotate every year, because a lunar year is actually about 10 days less than a solar year. So Ramadan, as the 6th month on the Islamic calendar, it actually goes up 10 days every year. So about 4 years ago, we were fasting in the middle of July and August. It was the longest fast that anyone had done in 40 years, right? I actually calculated like when was the last time Muslim fast during the longest days of the year, and it was 40 years prior. So now Ramadan came in on Monday, which was May 6th, and it will last for 29 or 30 days. What that means is that Muslims will fast from sunrise to sunset. And it is from the sunrise to the sunset, no matter where you are in the world. So here in the United States, we are fasting about 15 and a half hours. It is in other places in the world, they're fasting 20 hours, 18 hours. There's lots of different lengths of time based on where they are in their season. And of course, like people in Central America, they have it good right now. They're in winter time. Their days are like 10 hours long. They don't have to fast very long at all, right? And we are going to be kind of scooting ourselves here in North America into our winter, as Ramadan is 10 days earlier every year. So that means next year it's going to fall somewhere around what? That makes about April 22nd, somewhere around there. And then it will go up. It will go earlier and earlier every year. The good thing about that is the days will be shorter, right? We will be fasting less time. But the other thing about that is you are still you're still fasting, so you're still going to feel the fast. So why do Muslims fast? So there are specific verses in the Quran. So for people who may not be familiar with Islam, Muslims get their instructions of how to practice the religion from our holy book, which is the Quran, right? And then we get more detail as to how to apply the rulings from the example of the Prophet Muhammad, who lived 1,500 years ago in Arabia, from his example in the collection or the writings of what he did and what he said are called hadiths. So you got two new vocabulary words for people who are not Muslim. You have Quran and you have hadiths. So in the Quran, which Muslims hold as God's word, he says that he has prescribed fasting for us as he has prescribed it for those before us, so that we may learn taqwa. Taqwa is an Arabic term that's most readily translated as fear of God or reverence of God, right? So this is the main reason that God had prescribed fasting. So what's very interesting as to how we are prescribed fasting and our reverence for not just ourselves, but also for the religions that came before us. When God refers to as he has prescribed it for those before us, it is a recognition that he has prescribed fasting to both Christians and to Jews. Because in Islam, we believe that Islam is just a part of the lineage of God's religions, right? So we believe that Judaism was a religion of the people of the book, and we believe in Moses, and it was sent through Moses, right? So this was the instructions of God during that time. We believe in Jesus Christ and him being the messenger of that time. And so this was the instructions of God during that time. And then we believe that just as Jesus came after Moses, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon them all, came after Jesus, and it was the instructions of God from his time until the end of time, right? So the Prophet Muhammad will be the last prophet. So when in this verse, when God said he has prescribed it as he has prescribed it, like he has prescribed it to those before us, it is a recognition that both Jews and Christians were also prescribed fasting. But the Muslim fast is a little bit different. So from sun up to sundown, we have three specific things that we absolutely cannot indulge in, right? There are other things that you're supposed to restrain from, but there's definitely three specific things. One, no food. And that means none at all. That means that you cannot consume anything via your mouth. You can't have a snack. There's also the second thing is there's no water, right? No liquids. So no, people ask us all the time, you can't even drink water? Nope, no water, no soda, no, just give me one little almond, none of that. Absolutely no food. The third thing is that if you have a spouse, there is no sexual intercourse during the times of fasting with your spouse. So those are three things that you are commanded to not do from sunrise to sunset. So sunrise for a Muslim's purpose of fast is if you go outside in the early morning when there is the break of dawn. So it is described as when there is a string of white along a black sky, right? So here in Connecticut, we are starting our fast around 4:15 in the morning. So around about 4:15, we stop eating. Now, sunset for us is when the red glow appears in the sky, right? So sunset here in Connecticut is around about 8 p.m. So from 4:15 a.m., so this is kind of just helping you understand the practicality of how it's applied. From about 4:15 a.m. to about 8 p.m., there's no food, no drink, no sexual contact, right? So those are the three things that you are abstaining from. Fasting in Ramadan is not just considered kind of like a physical thing that we do, but it is also very spiritual for Muslims. So you will find that Muslims during this month, they get connected to their spirituality and connected to their religion. So I always like to tell people things on a very practical level. This is one of the reasons why people will say, well, I know a Muslim and they do this, and this all year long, but then they stop during Ramadan. Is that being a real Muslim? First of all, nobody can determine what a real Muslim is but God. Second of all, this is actually not uncommon. One of the things that Muslims try to do, no matter how strict or lenient you were throughout the year, is to have self-restraint during the time of Ramadan so that you can increase your blessings. So some of the beliefs of Muslims, what happens during this month is when you do good, it is multiplied, right? So you're getting blessings throughout the year as you do things throughout the year, but when you do it during Ramadan, it's multiplied. So you will find Muslims being extra generous, extra nice. Are they being fake? Nope. They're just trying to take advantage and get the biggest bang for their buck, right? So they do it during this month so that they can be really, really up on their game in order for them to get as many blessings as they possibly can. So that's one of the spiritual benefits of this month as well. So you will find Muslims trying to really be kind and nice and giving. Lots of charity happens during this month. Muslims give a lot during this month. But some of the challenge you have is that you are fasting and you're going without food and drink. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of like the practical, the physical things that happens to the body when you fast towards the second part of the show. But for now, let's talk a little bit about some of the other significance of Ramadan. So Ramadan is not only for the fast. So when God says in the Quran that he has created this month so that you can develop taqwa or reverence of God, it doesn't leave it as just the fast, right? So there are verses and sayings that talks about this is something that is solely for God. When we do any other deed in our life, people can see that we're doing it, right? So only we know the intentions behind it. When you give charity, even if you give it in secret, right, you're giving it to somebody knows, right? So here, give this person this thing. The person you gave it to know. You putting it inside of the box inside of your mosque, a person can see you. When you're praying, right, these are things that people can see you do. But when you're fasting, the only person that knows whether or not you're fasting is you and God. So God says that the servant abandons food and drink for my sake. And so the reward for it is with me. So it's one of the greatest rewards that you get. You don't get it in this world. You get it in the hereafter. And so it's considered one of the best deeds that you can do is for you to abstain for food and drink for the sake of God. Another significance of Ramadan, which a lot of people actually are not aware of, or a lot of non-Muslims are not aware of, is that it is also considered the month of the Quran, meaning that our holy book was actually revealed during this month, that we believe the revelations of what God has instructed the people to do happened during the month of Ramadan. And because of that, we are encouraged to review and to read as much Quran as we possibly can. Ideally, we are instructed or encouraged rather to read the entire thing during this month. Yes, that's from beginning to end. So there's 30 days during this month. The Quran has been broken up into their 30 individual sections, and it's called a juz. And each J-U-Z, not juice, not J-U-I-C-E, J-U-Z. And each person is encouraged to read 1/30th of the Quran every single day, right? So this was a practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It was something that would happen every single year. So we believe that the angel Gabriel would come down during the month of Ramadan every night, and he would review each of the sections of the Quran with the Prophet every single night. And so we are encouraged to follow this example and to do this as well. And as you can imagine, that takes a bit of time. So one of the other things that we also do is we have a special prayer during the month. Yes, Muslims do pray 5 times a day. And in Ramadan, there is a 6th prayer. So again, the 5 times a day is what you are obligated to do. Like every Muslim should be praying 5 prayers every single day. But this one is a special prayer that is highly, highly encouraged for you to do during the month of Ramadan. It is called Taraweeh, right? And it happens after the 5th prayer, and it is much longer than our regular prayers. So just like on a practical level, when a Muslim prays, it takes about 2 to 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you're feeling really religious, right? Doesn't really take that long. I used to tell when my children were smaller and I would take them to school, anytime they went into a new school, I always sat and I met with the principal and the guidance counselor to explain to them that they had to pray during the day and make sure that they had a place to pray, that their teachers were aware that they needed to pray at this specific time so that we can work with the school. Like I would try to say, okay, is the prayer in during lunchtime or during a break, so they didn't have to miss class. Sometimes they would have to excuse themselves from class and they would have to go and pray. And so as you know, young people do, teenagers, preteens do, I would always have to explain to the teachers that, okay, they are going to take 5 minutes to pray, 10 minutes if they have to make ablution before that. So if they're gone out of class for 30 minutes, they're playing around. It don't take them 30 minutes to pray. So I had to make sure we kept them in check, work with the teachers. And so the teachers was like, okay. So I realized I needed to tell the teachers that after my kid was like trying to skip class, claiming that he was praying. So, make sure you let the teachers know. Sometimes they just be playing in the hall. They don't actually be out there praying. So It takes probably about, say, 5 minutes for a Muslim to make the average prayer. So when you're saying like you're breaking to go pray, 5-10 minutes max, right? But during Ramadan, the prayer that happens in the evening time is actually about 2 hours long, because they are reciting 1/30th of the Quran during that prayer. So, one of the things about having Ramadan during the time when the days are longer is that your prayer at night is longer, right? So, we can't start this prayer until after about 9:30 and sometimes 10, and then you're praying until midnight. You don't get home until like 12:30, and then you have to get up at about 3:30, 4 o'clock so that you can eat if you're going to eat in the morning time. So that makes sleep a really big struggle, and we're going to talk about that in a practical part in the second part of the show. So this prayer, this Tarawih prayer, is generally done at the mosque, and it is a time also for all of the community to come together and to pray together. So it is a very unifying time for Muslims, because you see people in Ramadan that you literally don't see all year, and that is absolutely fine. We love to see people in Ramadan, even if we didn't see them all year long at the mosque. But it creates a sense of cohesiveness and unity when you are standing in a place and you are praying with sometimes 200 other people, 300 other people, right? Sometimes it flows into the parking lot. And that's very unifying and reaffirming for many Muslims. So this is a really special time for Muslims. One of the other things that makes it a really important time for community and unity is to break the fast together. So in many mosques and in many houses, when it's time to break fast, we gather together as community. Sometimes at the mosque, like a family or several families will get together and they will feed all of the entire community. So yes, they are literally making food for 300 people, because there's great blessings in feeding someone who is fasting, to giving them the actual food that they are breaking their fast. There's great blessings in it. And as we talked about earlier, during the month of Ramadan, Muslims really try to multiply on their blessings. And also, too, there's a lot of community building, meaning people will host dinners and gatherings at their house, again, trying to get that blessing, but also unifying and coming together with friends. Sometimes friends that you haven't seen in a while, sometimes friends that you just want to spend more time with, friends that you're going to become closer with. It really brings people together. So I know I enjoy that. I have a few friends who every year we know that we are going to not just go to their house for iftar, as they host annual iftars, but also meet new people and discover a bigger and a wider range of communities. So it really does bring people together. This is some of the practical and daily livings of Muslims during the month of Ramadan. If you are just tuning in, you are listening to Mornings with Mubarakah on 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and I'm streaming live from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut. We are also live on TuneIn Radio, Facebook, Instagram. You can catch us on Periscope. We are live on all different types of platforms. All you have to do is look for me under Fit Muslima. And I am Fit Muslima everywhere, Instagram, Periscope, everywhere. Or you are going to look for WNHHLP, which is the radio arm of the New Haven Independent. We are hyper-local news that is giving a local perspective to what's going on in the world. So for Ramadan, and today we're talking about Ramadan. So I should tell you, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about Ramadan, which is the Muslims' holy month and a month of fasting. And 1.8 billion Muslims around the world is participating and recognizing this month of spirituality. And we are talking a little bit about the spiritual beliefs and benefits of Ramadan and fasting, and a little bit about how it happens on a practical level, right? What is it that, what are Muslims actually doing? This is always an interesting question to me, that when people learn about the way Muslims are instructed to practice, and they're like, how do you do that in like 2019, right? How in the world do you do that? And it's not as difficult as it may seem. Fasting actually, because you're doing it for a spiritual reason, many people find it much easier, particularly doing it in Ramadan. So the interesting thing that I always find is when people say, like, when I try to fast outside of Ramadan, it's so hard, but in Ramadan, it's easy. And it's that spirituality that's connected to it that is universal, that I believe that makes it much easier during this month of fasting. So, well, some of the things that happens when you're fasting, here in America, some of the practical ways of fasting. So I was born and raised Muslim, and generally, most people have their kids start fasting around about 7 or 10. So let's talk a little bit about kind of like the practicality of what happens when you are Muslim and you grow up in America and you are fasting. So I think I started to fast when I was about 7. And when you fast when you're 7, I do remember it being kind of like something that I wanted to do, right? So oftentimes people are like, oh, well, do parents make their kids fast? Kids want to be like their parents. And because kids want to be like their parents, when you see your older siblings, when you see your mom and dad, they're getting up. It was so exciting. Like as a 7-year-old, like, oh my God, I get to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You would not think that would be exciting for a 7-year-old. But believe me, it is totally exciting. It's like the best thing. You feel so grown up. It's sort of kind of like, I guess I can relate it to as a girl, the first time your mom lets you put on lipstick, right? Even if you're just playing house in your bedroom, it's like, oh my God, I am really growing up. I'm a big girl now. And fasting becomes that for American Muslim children. And I presume children all over the world, that you get to do what the grown-ups do. So it's hardly ever a make a kid fast. It's like, oh wow, I get to fast just like the grown-ups. Now, mind you, fasting is not obligatory upon children. It is only obligatory upon people who are, I guess I should have mentioned that earlier, right? Who has to fast in Islam? Any sane adult is obligated to fast. It is one of the 5 obligations of a Muslim. So that means an adult in Islam is anyone who has reached puberty. So for males and females, whatever age puberty is, even if it's 12 or if it's 15, that is what is considered you are now adult and you are obligated to do the things that adults are obligated to do in Islam. So for those are the people that are obligated. Also, any sane adult, meaning that an adult who has the mental capacity to understand the fast. So I'll give you an example. I have a niece who is autistic. She is non-audible autistic, and she doesn't have the capacity to understand fasting and why we fast. So she's not obligated to fast. She doesn't have to fast. Also, people who do not have to fast are people who are chronically ill. So if you have an illness that restraining from food and drink will exacerbate the illness, will make it worse, then you are exempt for fasting. So that may be somebody with hypoglycemia. It may be somebody with an illness that requires them to take medication throughout the day. So that goes to a question that also is often asked, which is, what if you have to take medicine? If you have to take medicine and your life is dependent on it, or your health is dependent on it, then you do not have to fast. The compensation for not fasting is for you to feed one hungry or needy person every day that you aren't able to fast. So that can be feeding somebody who is in need. It can be going down to the soup kitchen. And it's not even feeding them like you don't have to give them a 5-course meal. It's giving them, just a serving of food, right? For every day that you are not able to fast. Women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, who fasting will jeopardize the health of their child, they don't have to fast. So do some pregnant women fast? Yeah, there are pregnant women who fast and they are absolutely fine and their baby is fine. Do some breastfeeding women fast? Absolutely. There are women who are breastfeeding. It's about them knowing their own individual body, right? So I have 4 children. I was never able to fast while I was breastfeeding or while I was pregnant. And I knew that because I would literally get pains in my stomach when I would fast, like contraction. I would actually get contractions. So that happened with my second child, and I never did it after that. I would literally get contractions when I tried to fast while I was pregnant. So I was exempt for fasting during the time. If you're breastfeeding and you notice that while you're breastfeeding, you're not producing milk and your child is not going to be able to be fed because you are the source of food, then you are exempt from fasting, right? Those are reasons why pregnant or breastfeeding women would not fast. So when we talk about fasting, right, also to not just chronic illnesses. So when are people who are temporarily don't have to fast? If you get sick while you're fasting, so it doesn't have to be a chronic illness. Say, you get flu or pneumonia and you have to take medications in order to make yourself feel better, then you can opt out not to fast and make it up at a later date. So if you don't have a chronic illness, it's a temporary illness, you can actually make the fast up later on as opposed to feeding someone, which is obligated for somebody with a chronic illness, right? If you're traveling, that's also a dispensation that we have, is that a person who travels, you do not have to fast while you're traveling. You can if it does not cause any difficulty for you, but you don't have to. So those are ways that there's always exceptions to the rule. There's very little in Islam that's like black or white. There's always exceptions to the rule. So when you talk about, when we are talking about fasting on a practical level in 2019, it's actually really practical. And not just practical, but now so much research is done on the physical benefits of fasting, right? So we know that people all over the world, in every single religion almost, well, definitely every major religion, has used fasting as a way of increasing spirituality, as a way of improving health, right? So we know that there are many benefits to fasting. And those benefits actually come when you restrain, when you do not consume food, right? Or a calorie in beverage. So there's 2 types of fasting, right? So there's water fasting. So let's take spirituality out of it for just a minute and just talk about the physical types of fasting, right? So fasting, particularly when researchers look at the physical benefit, they look at what's called dry fasting and wet fasting. What Muslims do is considered dry fasting, which means we don't even drink water. Wet fasting, which often people who engage in intermittent fasting, right? Something that I teach my clients how to do, that lots of people do. It's becoming definitely a groundswell of a movement of doing intermittent fasting. It's often wet fasting, which means you don't eat anything, but you're allowed to drink water. You're allowed to drink coffee with no additives, tea with no additives. So that's considered a wet fast. Muslims don't do wet fasting. We do dry fasting. No food, no drink. It's a designated period of time. And what researchers have found is that there are immense benefits to this type of eating, of not going, and all of those benefits come from your body actually changing its metabolic process and going into what is called ketosis. So here is a really, really fascinating part of fasting. I did kind of like a funny video the other day. Well, I thought it was funny. Some people didn't think it was funny, but I thought it was funny. And I talked about how fasting actually is, it puts you into ketosis even if you are not following a ketogenic diet. People think ketosis is like it's some weird thing that you eat certain foods and it happens to your body, but ketosis is actually a very natural process, that it's a built-in mechanism of being a human being. Actually, pretty much every mammal, because they've done studies on rats and monkeys and different types of mammals, and it is a natural ability that people have, or mammals have, when they go without food, right? So ketosis is when your body no longer has any glucose inside of your blood, and no glycogen, which is glucose in your blood turns to glycogen when it's stored in the liver, and then your body begins to burn fat as fuel. So this happens automatically when you go more than 12 hours without eating, right? So it takes about 10 to 12 hours for your liver to deplete its glycogen stores. Now, when that happens, your body naturally goes into ketosis. So we here in Connecticut, we're fasting about 15 and a half hours every day. So the last 3.5 hours, everybody is experiencing a little bit of ketosis. Now, most people, unless they're following a ketogenic diet, they reverse that as soon as they eat, right? Because they are eating. Muslims have a tradition of breaking their fast with dates. This is an option. And dates have kind of like, it is one of the sweetest, especially a dry date, one of the sweetest and carb dense and sugar dense foods there is. So most people, when they break their fast, they immediately come out of ketosis and they go back into replenishing glycogen stores, right? Because they're eating dates, they're eating rice, they're eating pasta, right? And so the next day, the process kind of like starts all over again. If you're following a ketogenic diet, you actually don't consume that amount of carbohydrates or sugar, and so you benefit from this process on an ongoing basis. So what happens when you're fasting is your insulin level, the first thing that happens is the most important thing, your insulin level drops. Your insulin is what I call your domino hormone. Insulin is going to either promote good things to happen or bad things, not bad, or unhealthy things to happen, and it's all a part of a chemical process. One hormone triggers another, triggers another, triggers another. So for example, when your insulin level is high, it actually promotes fat storage. One of the reasons why fasting increases weight loss is because it drops your insulin level. So here's an interesting little caveat. A lot of people think that when you fast, you are going to lose weight because you're starving yourself or you're eating less calories. By the way, most people don't eat less calories when they fast. They just concentrate all their calories until after they break their fast. So this is a reason as well that many Muslims actually do not lose weight during Ramadan, because they're still eating the same amount of calories, the same foods, and sometimes more or worse foods, but they're just doing it after dark. So the idea of fasting of the month of Ramadan being a quote unquote diet is actually not true. On a practical level, it's not true. It can be a good time for people to drop weight, but it doesn't work out that way, because after they break their fast, they go ham, for lack of a better term. So the reason why that it increases your fat burn is actually not just because you are restraining from food. It's because the restraint from that food drops your insulin level. And when your insulin level drops, lipolysis increases, which is your body's ability to burn fat, right? When your insulin level drops and your glycogen stores are depleted, your body literally goes and converts your stored fat into ketones that it uses for energy. So that's where the term ketogenic comes from, or ketogenic diet comes from. Ketones is what your body is converting fat into. All right. So, and the ketones is what's used for energy instead of glucose. And every part of your body can use ketones, even your brain. We used to think, scientists and researchers used to think that the brain only functions on glucose. But then they discovered that not only does the brain function on ketones, but it actually can function 25% better on ketones, right? And so they did this research by giving people who are glucose dependent puzzles to do, memory tests to do, and then they put them on a ketogenic diet, make sure they were in ketosis, their brain were using ketones as energy, and they gave them the same puzzles and memory, and they found that they actually did 25% better. Their brain was functioning 25% better when it was dependent on ketones. So that's how we come up with that. Wow, brain actually functions better on ketones. When you're fasting, the other thing that happens is something that's called autophagy. So when you see, and a lot of this is going around on the internet, videos of, well, fasting actually increases longevity and it detoxes your body. What they're referring to is something called autophagy. Autophagy is your body's natural ability to literally clean and detox you on a cellular level. It is your body going and taking cells and they're repairing them. It is getting rid of the old ones that can't repair, and it actually speeds up the development of new cells. So this is called autophagy. Autophagy only happens when your insulin level is low. So that's really important, because remember I talked about earlier that when people break their fast, they then eat lots of carbohydrates, lots of sugar. Immediately the insulin level is rising, autophagy stops. So you're only benefiting from that about 3 hours a day if you're going back to eating sugar and carbs and things like that in the evening. So you are getting that benefit while you are fasting. That kind of like once your insulin level drop, as it drops more and more and more, and I don't mean drop like below normal, but drop lower than it normally is, right? The level of autophagy actually increases. It is that repair of cells that actually increases longevity, right? So they've done studies on mice and they find that it's this autophagy, this repair of cells, that actually increase sometimes their lives by 400%. Well, we can't really follow a human for 400 years, so we don't know if it's going to allow you to live for 400 years, but it is applicable to human beings, meaning that it increases the lifespan your lifespan, your longevity. So those are some of the kind of very physical benefits of fasting. A lot of people you will hear when they talk about fasting, whether they're fasting in the month of Ramadan or they're fasting at another time, will describe a point of having clarity and having focus. This is also one of the benefits of fasting, right? When we talk about the brain works 25% better off of ketones, right? When you are in that state of going back into a ketogenic state, that is where the clarity and the focus and all of those, that mental acuity comes from. It comes from being in a state of ketosis in your brain using ketones for energy. So all of those are great physical benefits of fasting. Before I end the show, because I only have a few minutes left, I just also wanted to give a couple of tips on how you can support Muslims during the month of Ramadan. So really quickly, ask questions. We love when people ask questions, but don't ask silly questions. Hopefully you've listened to this entire show, and so you will know that, no, we can't drink water. No, we don't want any of your food. You are not offending us by eating in front of us. We understand that the world doesn't stop for us, right? So continue to go about. You might just want to maybe have a coffee meeting instead of taking somebody out to lunch, right? Because it's easier for you to be in a coffee shop than it is for everybody to be eating full meals around you and you're just sitting there, right? Looking like the oddball. So that's another way. Also being understanding as to, yeah, there will be some fatigue during the day. So mid-afternoon meetings may not be the best thing. Early morning meetings may be better, right? Being understanding of that if you're a teacher or if you have children in your class or even in your inside of you're a professor, right? Understanding that it's not disinterest, it's not that they didn't do their homework because they were playing around, right? It literally is just being physically, and it doesn't mean to excuse them, but just be a little bit more understanding. If you have any questions about Ramadan that I can answer, you can feel free to comment underneath this video on Instagram, on Facebook, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And if you are just tuning in, then you missed the show, but guess what? I got great news. You can listen to all of the past shows of Mornings with Mubarakah by going to SoundCloud or iTunes and looking up WNHHLP 103.5 FM. And when you do that, you are going to look for Mornings with Mubarakah television show. And in that show, in that list of shows, you're going to see all of the shows that we've done in the past, including this one, and you can listen to it from beginning to end, because not only are we live on social media, live on the radio, but we are also archived as a podcast. Isn't technology awesome? So I want to thank you for listening today, and I would like to wish everybody Ramadan Kareem, or Ramadan Mubarak from Mubarakah. Those are two greetings that you can feel free to give your Muslim friends and colleagues. You can say Ramadan Kareem, and they will respond back to you Ramadan Kareem or Ramadan Mubarak. Kareem means have happy. It means have a happy Ramadan. Mubarak means blessed. Have a blessed Ramadan. So Ramadan Kareem or Ramadan Mubarak. And until next week, be a voice and not an echo. We are, I have exit music, I do.